And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
Indeed, it is Friday. That's right, Greta, you pint-sized protagonist. This is our own personal Friday protest, Climate Change Roundtable, episode number 99, the CO2 Dilemma, Endangerment or Benefit. I'm your host, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate at the Heartland Institute. Joining me today, we have our regular panelist, H. Sterling Burnett, Director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center, and Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow at the Robinson Center. We also have with us special guest, Greg Reichstone of the CO2 Coalition, who will be discussing our main topic today. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be on as usual.
All right, so I'm going to introduce the main topic here, and then we'll get on to our crazy climate news, So climate change issues are mostly centering around increasing carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere. However, what is seldom mentioned by climate alarmists is the fact that CO2 can be both a benefit as well as a detriment. But from the climate alarmism point of view, it's always a detriment, nothing but bad. But that's really not true. And that's what we're going to explore today. 2 new reports have been released that will supplement our topic. One is a climate science team report on the validity of EPA's 2009 greenhouse gas endangerment finding. And from the CO2 Coalition, Wyoming and climate change. CO2 should be celebrated, not captured. So we'll get to those in a little bit. But first, let's get to our crazy climate news. Some of the nuttiest, eye-rolling stuff that's happened in the past week on the internet. First one up, Sterling's favorite topic, buses driven by electricity, e-buses. The Wall Street Journal has another winter of e-bus discontent. And guess what? Buses go boom again.
Buses go boom. Buses don't start. Buses stop when they're not supposed to. They run out of juice. And then maybe they go boom on top of that. In the end, e-buses are a bad idea. I certainly don't want school kids riding in them if people are stupid enough to take an e-bus public transit system after the the numerous instances of these things catching fire. Well, that's on their heads. They maybe they like to skydive without a parachute too.
Yeah. It just seems like every week we've got a new bus either stopping, rolling backwards on a hill, exploding in flames. I mean, the track record for e-buses has been pretty pitiful.
But to be fair, no worse than e-cars or e-scooters.
Yeah.
In the end, the government, if the internal combustion engine had these kinds of problems, they would ban it. They would pull it off the road. In the end, they did what, Ralph Nader wrote his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, and the Corvair is no more. There are all sorts of products that get pulled. You don't find good old traditional lawn darts that I grew up with, because the government determined them to be unsafe and lawsuits. But somehow, despite continual things like this, the government says, "Oh no, we gotta push these. They've got to go forward full force." I'm sorry.
Goodness, look at those poor people.
Yeah, they're putting people at risk, and they should not be promoting this technology. If it succeeds in the marketplace on its own, well, so be it. If people want to burn up, but my suspicion is it wouldn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll probably have another e-bus story next week. It seems to be a regular feature. Okay, so the next nutty one is Chicago. The city of Chicago is suing oil companies for the impacts of climate change. Yeah, you heard that right. The city of Chicago has decided that climate change is making their city unlivable, uninhabitable, broken, whatever you might want to call it. So they've got this crazy lawsuit together that says they're going to sue these companies. They're going to sue ExxonMobil and, everybody else for supposed problems that climate change has created. Well, if I were these oil companies, I would simply say, you know what, Chicago, you're right. We're not going to send you any more gasoline, oil, or natural gas. Have fun.
Yeah, good luck.
The lawsuit mentions the Heartland Institute and some of our allies as well, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
Well, there you go. There you
I
go.
will say, in my opinion, sorry to the rest of the Heartland staff, Chicago is uninhabitable, but it's not because of climate change.
Well, first, they're getting them. They're claiming that they made false claims, that they knew that climate change was a danger, but they continue to sell their products and tout them as good for the planet and good for us. Of course, they are good for us. The fact that Chicago's police department, I suppose the mayor himself, the attorney general also gets around in a gasoline-powered vehicle. They must think there's some utility to them, all their medical things. So it's not the city. It's not the first city. There are numerous. There are some states that have sued over this crap. I wished, they all took the Atlas shrugged point of view and said, just okay, we'll withdraw our product. You no longer have this product. You think it's bad. We'll not fight you on this. See how you do without it. In the end, maybe they think that somehow CO2 from ExxonMobil and other companies that they're suing befuddled their politicians so much that they declared a sanctuary city, and so now they have a migrant crisis. Bad policies have ruined Chicago, and they have nothing whatsoever to do with CO2. But cities are always looking for a big payday.
In Chicago,
cities are looking for a big payday. They always are. Yeah. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, you're muted.
Well, as you know, we've got Vijay Jayaraj. He's been writing for a number of years, but over in India, they had real problems with those e-scooters going up in flames because they have a lot of them. The next shooter, the next thing to happen that will really transform us all, and sooner or later, one of these fires is going to occur in an underground parking garage, which would be just horrific. How do you put it out? It would be, that might lead to the end of this entire EV scam, to have something like that happen. It's bound to happen sooner or later with these lithium batteries that kind of self-ignite.
Well, I think you're way too optimistic there, Greg. They've had these things already happen in garages. They've used thousands of gallons of water to put them out. In Australia, they have a battery factory, a big. I think it's a Tesla battery factory, but it may be an Amazon battery factory. I'm not sure. A couple of years ago, it caught fire, but not because it was the batteries weren't plugged in; they were just sitting there on the shelf. It caught fire, and it took them. They had to sit there and just watch it burn for a while. And then when they opened because they didn't have the kind of gas mask you need to filter out the toxins from that stuff in an enclosed space. And then when they opened the door, they had to back away again because the fumes were so bad.
Yeah.
So
I look here in Virginia. I've got an apartment building that's 12 stories high, and they've got 3 floors of vehicles underneath. I mean, it scares me to death. I see these people charging their EVs underneath where I live. That's kind of why I got a second floor apartment. I've got a little escape ladder. I'm sorry, I'm a little paranoid about it, but that would be horrific.
Yeah, it's dumb on so many levels, and probably not going to be successful because they're going to have to demonstrate actual damage. And a lot of these folks, they conflate weather and climate, So this thunderstorm that rolled through was actually climate change. Well, no, it was not. And so that's probably going to be a good portion of their argument.
They're going to have to also tease out what is caused by so-called climate change and what is caused by other factors, and they have to take into account their own responsibility. These products are things they use daily. In the end, no oil company, look, oil companies aren't drug cartels. They don't sit people on the corner and shoot them if they don't sell their wares. They don't force you to take their wares. It's not addictive. You don't have to. I don't get jonesing for some gas to pump into my vehicle. So it's people's choice. And if they choose to do so, and Chicago's choosing to do so every day, to use this product, it's hard to say, to make the case that the product is bad. We know it's bad, because if they know it's bad, then they should be stopping using it on their own.
Well, and I will say, I really think these kinds of lawsuits, isn't this kind of what those attribution studies are, kind of meant for, to use as a weapon in this kind of thing? Because they can they can push one of these studies out at any time that they want. I mean,
Yeah.
it's called rapid attribution for a reason. They can, claim that a hurricane or a tornado or something was caused by climate change before the data's even come in.
Yeah, they can get someone on the stand with a Ouija board or a crystal ball and says, "Oh, I see that so and so died on this date due to climate change." It's the same thing as an attribution study. The computer models are no more than crystal balls with computer screens.
Yeah, I would point out that climatologists do it with crystal balls. All right, let's go on to our next crazy climate news topic. This one is from the New York Times. How many people are going to die from climate change? Oh, no, someone's going to die from climate change. I challenge anyone to go out there and find a death certificate from a coroner that says this man died from climate change. There's not one.
That's a scary challenge there. There's a coroner up in Canada who I think has already listed a couple of climate change deaths.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's news to me.
Of course, I'm not telling you gentlemen and lady anything you don't know, but of course we know that 15 to 20 times as many people die due to cold as due to heat. You all know that,
Right.
and I'm sure many of those watching today know that. So we can safely say that global warming will save lives. Of course, people's heads explode when you say that.
No, that's what it's not just we say it. It's what the research shows, right? That as the Earth has warmed, deaths due to inopportune temperatures, non-optimum temperatures, have fallen dramatically by the hundreds of thousands. Deaths
we've got an article about that from our Climate at a Glance website. Let's bring that up and show you that. Show you the graph that's in there about the temperature-related deaths and so forth. It's tremendous, the drop in temperature-related deaths that we've had over the last 100 years. Scroll down a little bit and look, and look just a little bit. There's just no data to support this sort of thing.
And then, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Heat deaths are only up 0.21%, while cold deaths are down 0.51%. So as Greg says, climate change, or AKA global warming, is saving lives.
It is, and one of the things I really like talking about, as you guys know, is this strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of humanity and the human condition. And it's always the cold periods that they were horrific. The cold was accompanied with crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. It was the heat period, the hotter periods, warmer than today, that were hugely beneficial. Great empires and civilizations rose up. Life was good. Food was bountiful. And it's the warm periods like we're in today that have historically, they might call some of us, and they try and call John Clauser, the Nobel laureate in physics, a science denier. I would call them history deniers, because they're denying the actual history of the relationship between temperature and mortality.
Well, they're the ones denying science as well, because they pretend computer models are science. their predictions are science. No, computer models are tools, and they're only as good a tool as their projections correspond to reality, which isn't very good. The other thing is that it's not just that deaths due to temperatures are declining. So you can't say climate change is killing people there. And we're going to get to this in a second, of course, Greg, your study deals with this, but deaths from hunger and malnutrition are declining dramatically. And why is that? Well, part of it is the CO2 fertilization effect. I'm sorry. The net benefits of the modest warming we've experienced so far are tremendous. You can't measure the cost, but we see the benefits in hundreds of millions fewer people starving or malnourished.
And in this, our latest newsletter from the CO2 Coalition this week, I posted a chart comparing temperature from 1850 to today with famine deaths. And famine is the greatest threat historically to humanity, associated with droughts and famine. And we see that over the last 150 years, temperatures, as we know, are inclining. They're increasing and have been in fits and starts. But famine deaths have significantly declined, and that's because we're seeing this increase of crop growth from, I attribute it to three main things: CO2 fertilization effect, the warming effect, which means for longer growing seasons, and then also the use of nitrogen fertilizers, which are created using fossil fuels, mainly natural gas. So those three things combined, we're just seeing an explosion of crop growth. We show in my new book the top 8 crops in the world in terms of tonnage produced. All 8 of those are breaking records year after year after year, from cold countries to the hottest countries like India. This is something we should celebrate.
Yeah.
Two other things.
Let's move on to our next topic, because we're getting a little long on this one. Scientists are under arrest. Researchers are taking action over climate change. Yes, there's this one guy that they've cited in this article, and his name is, let me find it here, Kalmus. Peter Kalmus. They say in the article, climate scientist Peter Kalmus is freaked out, and he thinks everyone should be just as alarmed as he is over the state of the planet. And so he's advocating going out and protesting and get yourself arrested and make sure everybody knows it. Well, go right ahead, buddy. You're making climate science look foolish. I mean, I remember back 10 years ago, James Hansen got up on stage with a bunch of climate protesters in New York City, and they're up there beating the drums and smoking stuff. And I was just shocked that this man, the father of global warming, who started it all in June 1988, would get up there with these people and get himself into a protest. What's wrong with them? Why do they think this way?
I think Hansen also did something similar in England. He showed up at, I think, a coal plant to shut it down or block the entrance. He's long advocated leaving science behind and getting into activism.
Yeah, they just make themselves look silly. I mean, I testified 3 times up in Pennsylvania before the House Energy Environment Committee. There were always a dozen or 15 of these. They're really entertaining, but they would dress up as unicorns or witches, or they have these elaborate costumes. Oh, really? We're supposed to take you're serious about the subject. You're dressed like this. You just shake your head. They're easier to laugh at than to take seriously.
Yeah. So if you think that's crazy, take a look at our next story. No, that's not the one. This is from Fox Business that talked about, is climate change more of a threat than nuclear bombs? What do you guys think? I mean, is it worse to be made into toast over 100 years, or is it worse to be made into toast in 5 seconds?
I think they're actually doing us a favor and themselves a disservice by saying such idiotic things that any rational person knows is just wrong. If they say these, I think they're shooting themselves in the foot and exposing what a crazy radical agenda they have to say that a nuclear war is not as bad as climate change. We have to solve climate change.
Well, let's be clear. It's not some fringe activist saying things like this. It's the highest levels of government. I believe President Biden has said something similar. I know his climate czar, his former climate czar, John Kerry, has said as much. Others have said when the war broke out between Ukraine and, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Kerry said, well, he hoped he hoped this didn't distract people and Russia from its climate commitments because, that's more important than, the people on the ground dying today. They always say that about the poor people in Africa, whose economic growth and whose very lives are being stunted by malnutrition, that we got to worry about climate change 100 years from now so you can have development today. And now they're saying nuclear war. It's not surprising. It's just sad, especially since these are people of influence. It's dangerous.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me that they think that climate change is worse than nuclear bombs. I mean, climate change has not leveled any cities. Climate change has not destroyed nations. Climate change hasn't done any of those things that a nuclear bomb can do. Just one. It only takes one nuclear bomb to destroy certain nations, like England, for example. You got one on there, the whole nation's gone.
Just ask Japan whether they think climate change is worse than nuclear bombs. They're the only ones that have experienced it so far. I think they'd have some strong feelings on the matter.
Yeah, you'd think so. But no one asked those questions because those are difficult, and we don't like the answers to difficult questions, right? All right. Finally, the last crazy climate news of the week. The Assistant Secretary of Health implies that climate change is racist. Yes, you heard that right. Climate change is racist because it's disproportionately affecting people of color more than other, apparently. I mean, climate change is so intelligent. It just jumps right out there and goes right after people of color, apparently.
And this is coming from an authority on, all things science. God.
Yeah.
And of course, we just need to look at India and Africa and all the people of color there that are being destined to generational poverty because they're not allowed to have electricity development in their nations. They're not allowed to develop their own oil reserves, to create mine their own coal, create coal-generated electricity. Prime Minister Modi in India is going gung-ho on mining of coal and creating electricity. His goal is complete electrification. So you've got entire continents and a subcontinent of people of color that are being harmed by these same climate change philosophies.
Diane Selby says everything is racist according to them. Not everything. You know what's not racist? Climate policies aren't racist. Climate policies save, they take into account inequity, diversity, inclusion. Climate policies don't discriminate. They help people. And of course, it's climate policies that are precisely what is racist. Those are the things that are keeping people down, that are destroying lives daily, not climate change itself.
Yep. Climate change policy seems to be far worse than actual climate change. At least that's my opinion.
Linnea,
Okay.
do you have thoughts on this?
I have thoughts that our comment section is really funny, but yeah, no, it's same old, same old. Vijay over at CO2 Coalition covers this a lot, and he does a very good job with it. And so I highly recommend his writing on the subject of the, I guess the word that we're using is climate colonialism, just to stab the poker in a little bit.
Just as an FYI on VJ, I just received his new book, his first book this morning. So I've got something to review this weekend. And the title is Climate Imperialism. And just how his nation of India and the developing world are just being subjugated. And the climate imperialists have their thumb on the population to keep them, as I said, destined for generational poverty.
Yeah, green colonialism's been around for a while, even to some extent before climate change, the population movements, green colonialism. And VJ has been doing this for a while. I know I followed VJ. I interviewed him back before he joined CO2 Coalition, back when he was working primarily with the Cornwall Alliance. So he does great work.
Yeah.
No, we're
Anyway.
really happy with it's an honor to lead that with him and get his work in here. He's prolific, and he does write about this climate imperialism, and does it eloquently.
Jim Lakely writes, climate alarmism is out of control. Women identifying persons and minorities. Hardest hit. That's a take on a famous theme meme for headlines in the news media, you know? And unfortunately, it seems to be true in today's media. All right, let's get on to our main topic. Our main topic has to do with carbon dioxide. Is it a problem or is it a benefit? But the first thing we're going to talk about is our climate science team report on scientific validity of the EPA's 2009 GHG endangerment finding from the Climate Science Press, which is not the one up here that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to have that previous article you showed. If we can bring that other one up.
That's the actual document, though.
Right, but there was a news article that I wanted to highlight first. But all right, well, I'll let you guys just take it away. You're the experts on this. Go for it.
Well, you know, this is supposed to be sort of a layperson's version of an argument that they made before the Supreme Court, trying to get the Supreme Court to overturn the endangerment finding, or at least force the EPA to reconsider the endangerment finding. I didn't find it particularly laypersony. If I had edited it probably would have been shorter and more concise and clearer. But it basically shows what we have argued for a long time. You got to remember. So starting with Mass v. EPA, that's when this all started. It was trying to regulate CO2 emissions from automobiles, from transportation. And the EPA said they didn't have the authority. This was under the second George Bush. And the environmentalists and Massachusetts Attorney General, they sued and said that you did have the authority. And the Supreme Court determined that, yes, CO2 is a pollutant. Now, based on what? Based on the Clean Air Act, which basically says any emission is a pollutant. If it's emitted, it's a pollutant. So water vapor is a pollutant. All sorts of things that we wouldn't normally think of as pollutants, we normally think of pollution as sort of dangerous necessarily, are pollutants, just because that's how the Clean Air Act, the Supreme Court interpreted the Clean Air Act as determining what pollution is, if it's emitted. And so they said, so it is a pollutant. The only question is, you have to determine whether it's whether it causes danger. You have to issue an endangerment finding. And if you issue an endangerment finding and find that it causes danger, then if you don't regulate it, you have to explain why you're not going to regulate it. And of course, now that EPA had been given, the door had been cracked, they put the horse's head through. Initially, they said, okay, we find endangerment, but we're not going to regulate it because, and they gave some reasons. And the next administration came in and they overturned that, right? Obama came in and said, no, it's an you've issued an endangerment finding, we're going to regulate. Now, the problem is, it was, as this document goes through, it was based on false premises, the endangerment finding. It was based on computer models, which aren't science. It was based on the claim that climate change was having all sorts of effects, which it's not having. And it was based on the claim, three lines of argument. And they take it apart in this document, and they show that, first off, the computer models are not science and they're not accurate. The problems that supposedly they caused aren't happening. That we don't have measurements to show unusual temperature rise as opposed to temperature rise, if you look back in history. which they claim you did. So this document takes that apart. Unfortunately, in December, the Supreme Court refused to rehear, not based on a scientific argument, but based on they claim the scientists didn't have standing. They didn't have standing to bring the lawsuit.
Right. And so the bottom line is CO2 a pollutant? Well, it's really hard to argue that it is because it's all part of our natural process of photosynthesis. If you take away all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as some of the insane climate activists believe you should do, Earth's going to stop. Everything's going to die. And in fact, during the last ice age, the CO2 levels got down to about 250 parts per million, pretty close to it. I think it was 270. And at 250, there's not enough CO2 in the atmosphere to sustain photosynthesis for plants.
150.
150. I'm sorry.
150, right. Yeah, at the depths of the last ice advance, it got down to 182. And what Dr. Happers, I've learned from him recently, a lot of the high altitude areas actually were less than that 150 because the higher altitude, you have less atmosphere. And so a lot of those high altitude areas, the mountains were actually denuded by vegetation. And that's why we see a lot of dust in the glacial ice. Because we had lots of winds blowing. There were no plants to anchor that dust, which is interesting. And so if we look at it, and of course that's what we at the CO2 Coalition, this is our main thrust, are the benefits of carbon dioxide, and looking at it through Earth's history. And as a geologist, of course, that's what I like to do. And our current levels are near historic lows. Average CO2 levels throughout Earth's history is about 2,600 parts per million, 1/6 of what they are today. So we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. We're actually impoverished with CO2. And of course, we filed an amicus brief in that EPA suit that you were referencing, Sterling, recently.
We at Heartland had signed on to one in previous suits. Because this isn't the first time we challenged the endangerment has been issued. The thing is, under the Supreme Court's interpretation of pollution, simple respiration is pollution because we exhale CO2. We every one of us, including all those environmental alarmists that are concerned, emit CO2 into the atmosphere when they exhale, and thus, under the Supreme Court's definition, they're all polluters. But of course, the Clean Air Act limits the EPA's authority over certain types of polluters, so they don't get down to us yet. If they start issuing carbon credit cards and things like that, like they want to do, where you have your carbon allotment, then they will be getting down to us.
Yeah. I see you're scrolling through some of our climate facts on the CO2 Coalition website. So we're building an app actually that'll be expanding. I know Heartland's got a new app out, but we'll be launching ours here in a few months.
Yep. And we could probably argue that because of the increased CO2 we've done during the 19th and 20th centuries and now the 21st, we're actually terraforming our planet to our benefit. Seriously, if we had, let's say man had landed on this planet for the very first time from some other planet back when CO2 was down to 182 parts per million. And then, man starts building fires and everything else. And basically we'd terraform the planet to make it warmer and more habitable. That's really what is kind of going on here. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh boy, we see just I've gone beyond there is no climate crisis, and of course there isn't. But we've gone beyond that here. We look, and by almost every metric, we find that Earth's ecosystems, like you say, Anthony, are thriving and prospering from the near polar regions to the equator. Vegetation's increasing. Sea level is rising at 7 inches per century, which is not too alarming to me. Forest fires are in global decline. Forests are expanding. Deserts are shrinking. And food production is breaking records year after year after year. Show us something that's going wrong that we can definitively say. Don't use the climate models to predict what's going to happen in 50 or 80 years. Show me something. We've had now warming for a couple of centuries and increasing CO2. Surely by now you should be able to point to something and say, okay, this is bad things that are going on. It's hard for them to do that without using these futuristic, flawed climate models.
Well, and of course, the models, they've made predictions before. They've been making predictions since 1998. I mean, the environmentalists have been making predictions for a lot longer than that. But since 1998, they've been making climate-related predictions, and they never project them far enough out because numerous of these predictions, the time periods have come and passed, and the prediction didn't come true. You know, New York is not underwater already. As was predicted by Paul Ehrlich and some others. Hundreds of millions of people didn't starve. In fact, starvation has been declining. The snow has not ended, contrary to popular belief, popular assertion. You can pick probably dozens of predictions that have been made and timelines that they've been made by where the timetable has passed and the prediction didn't come true. But they don't get temperature in the past right. They don't get temperature in the present right, but we're supposed to trust their predictions of future temperatures. And the same is true for all their disaster scenarios.
If you look at the UN's, when they look at sea level rise, what do they point to? The Maldives, the most at-risk island chain on Earth. Well, 15,000 years ago, the Maldives were just above sea level. In the last 15,000 years, the Maldives, we've seen sea level rise of 400 feet. Why are these islands not under 400 feet of water? It's because of it's a geologic process known as accretion. These islands, all these thousands of islands around the world, they're not under 400 feet of water. They've grown along as sea level rises. Again, it's a geologic process known as accretion. And they don't want to hear you. People have never heard that. They don't understand that. But when you tell people, their eyes get wide.
It's the same with I've seen complaints from people regarding climate change and the smaller islands of Hawaii. And I would love to be able to pull up a geologic map of Hawaii and all of the old islands, because what a lot of people don't know is that Hawaii is an island that's formed by a hotspot of volcanism that has moved as the tectonic plates move over time. And so the reason why Hawaii is shaped the way it is because as the plate is, sorry, I just smacked my microphone, as the plate is moving, the hotspot moves. And so you get this trailing effect, and the older islands are being eroded away, and the newer islands are the bigger ones. And so that's going to happen regardless of climate change. No matter what, your older island is going to get eaten up.
Yeah, the Hawaiian Islands, that's a little bit different from like the Maldives, because those islands are formed because of volcanoes. And you're right, the recent volcanoes are higher islands, and as they drift on past the hotspot, they eventually subside. But you're right about that.
Even the smaller islands, though, I'll be really, really worried about them going away when the real estate prices on those islands just start going down dramatically, and I can snap up some real estate. I'll take my chance.
If you Google Forbes and Maldives, you'll find an article of 14 resort complexes being built in 4 airports. They're all insured by major international insurance companies who avoid risk like the plague. They aren't going to insure those if they think that they're going to be underwater in a few decades. Not at all. So what do the insurance companies think? They're voting with their money in their wallets and insuring all of those resort complexes.
Same thing is happening with Tuvalu and other island nations. They are not their populations are not becoming boat people leaving these islands for climate reasons. Instead, they're investing in infrastructure. They're inviting more tourism. They don't do that if they think they're not going to be around next week or next year or in 10 or 20 years before the hotels are even paid off.
Yeah, in my first book, I looked at the top 10 most at-risk islands and nations. And I looked at the population, I believe it was in 2005, and compared it to 2015. Each one of those at-risk nations had almost double the population was exploding. People weren't fleeing the islands, they were flocking to them, completely opposite of their predictions.
Now, to be fair, in some of those islands, if they are building on former wetlands or mangrove swamps and things, they might see some sinking because of impact, compaction, because of subsurface sinking, because of water withdrawal. But the islands themselves are actually gaining. Study after study shows they're gaining acres.
Yeah. Yep. Hmm.
So yeah, the bottom line is that CO2 is a benefit. There's no doubt about it. And without CO2, all life on Earth would cease to exist in a very short time. Photosynthesis would stop, not just on land, but also in the oceans with algae and so forth. And that's the top of that's going to collapse the food chain and everything else. And so it's been proven time and time again that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is actually beneficial to the food chain. And yet these alarmists treat it as if it's not, if it's poison, pollution, and so forth and so on. It really
It's
is.
hard. It's hard now for any of the alarmists to fight back or dispute that CO2 is not driving vegetation growth. But what they are saying is that it's leading to nutrition deficiencies, and we're dealing with that right now. Dr. Happer and others working with Albert Gletzel from Paraguay we're in the final stages of a report on that, on CO2 and nutrition. It's rather detailed.
Well, they also say it's causing more allergies, all sorts of things. But the one thing that this study, this recent report on the endangerment finding did do is it said the other problem is with the endangerment finding is it took the social cost of carbon into account that used but the government's social cost of carbon, but they completely ignore the social benefits of carbon. And it went through a lot of the stuff. I don't recall whether it referenced any of CO2 Coalition material, but they referenced, a lot of peer-reviewed material that basically shows the social benefits of carbon that far outweigh any purported costs, which can't be identified at all.
Yeah. Well, this new report we have coming out shortly on nutrition is very much needed, because there's been a lot of alarmist press about, food production is increasing, but the nutritional value is decreasing, and we pretty much categorically go through and destroy that argument.
And you've recently had a trip to Wyoming and got a new report on that.
Yeah, that was driven by Governor Mark Gordon. Came out. He wants to decarbonize the West, and he's got some fellow governors that Doug Burgum from North Dakota, Kristi Noem, governor in South Dakota. These governors have this mistaken opinion that it'll be really good to get rid of CO2 and we need to get it out of the atmosphere. And we've completed a Wyoming state-specific report about what's actually going on in Wyoming. The subtitle is CO2 should be celebrated, not captured. And I was really proud to lead the effort with this with Dr. Byron Sapoyan, our research and science associate, and Dr. Will Happer. We looked at temperature. We looked at state Wyoming specific temperature data, precipitation data. We looked at all the allegations of all the harm that's going to befall the cowboy state in the future. And we just set the pins up and knock them down one by one. So has there been an increase of Wyoming in the average temperature? Now, bear in mind, we use the United States Historical Climate Network from NOAA, USHCN, to get this data. And Anthony's going to tell you, well, there's still a lot of bogus urban heat island effect there, but it's not as bad as the full data set. And so we see there's about a 1.2 degree Fahrenheit increase from 1895 to currently. But what's really important here is the maximum temperatures and high temperature readings in Wyoming have been in a 90-year decline. And you'll see here the blue line here is CO2. The red lines is temperature. And what we also see, what's really driving this increase of average temperature is not an increase in heat waves. We document here that the percentage of stations that experienced 100-degree Fahrenheit in warming have also been in decline. What we find are the minimum temperatures, the nighttime coldest temperatures are increasing significantly. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. If you've been to, I just got back from Wyoming in February, and we were fortunate that it was in the mid 40s during the day for our ventures there. But it gets pretty cold in Wyoming at night, and I'm sure the people in Wyoming are pretty happy that we've got cold nighttime temperatures are warming, and it's significantly for agriculture. What does the increase of the coldest nighttime temperatures mean? It means that growing seasons are lengthened, and we capture here in this report. We looked at growing seasons for the continental United States, and we find there that growing seasons since 1900 have increased more than 2 weeks. And so this warming of coldest temperatures means that killing frosts end earlier in the spring, arrive later in the fall. And if you've got an apple orchard, what do you fear the most? Late killing frosts, and there are less of them. This chart here, we're showing the production of agriculture is greatly exceeding population growth. So as population is expanding, food production is expanding even more. So we're able to feed a growing population. That's a good thing. And the interesting thing with this chart is that actually we're using about the same amount of acreage, that it hasn't really increased much. And this increase in CO2 and the warming is leading to a greening of the earth, as we've all seen the NASA image of the green earth. But a lot of people attribute it only to CO2, but a lot of it is the warming, as the tree lines in the northern hemisphere march northward, as the tree lines go higher altitudes on the mountains. That's expanding the amount of forested area, and so we see this incredible greening of the earth. And we have a chart in here too. We look at a recent study that identified 7 of the true hotspots of greening and vegetation, and the northern Great Plains, which Wyoming is part of that, is one of those. I guess we'd call it a hotspot of vegetation growth. So the people of Wyoming, the main thing is, if I have to speak directly to them, I'd say sleep well. There is no climate crisis. It was quite an adventure. We first started in Gillette, Wyoming, in the northeast of the state. It's the Powder River Basin. This is the greatest coal producing region in the world. We visited the Black Thunder coal mine, which is just it's the largest coal mine in North America, with the largest shovel. We got to tour that, and also took a look at a coal-fired electricity generation plant, and it was in full operation, and you couldn't even see anything coming out the stack. And you couldn't even tell it was in operation. It's the other thing coming out that stack is the beneficial molecule, carbon dioxide and water vapor. But the beneficial molecule, carbon dioxide, that the Governor Gordon wants to strip out of the atmosphere at great cost. We talked a little bit about Byron Sepoyan dealt with the carbon dioxide capture, direct air capture, and sequestration. Interestingly, he was employed as a worldwide global expert on CO2 capture before he joined the CO2 coalition. So he actually learned of the benefits of CO2 and was fascinated, had never heard this. And he actually quit his job. He knew he was doing wrong, working for the wrong side. And I had to give a guy like that a job. So he's now a full-time research and science associate for the CO2 coalition. So he came from CO2 capture to CO2 coalition. It's really a good story. There aren't many people as brave and willing to make that step as what he was.
If I can ask, so you've written this report about Wyoming. Wyoming's sort of a small state relative to the rest of the nation. It might help our audience is probably might be interested in, what precipitated the trip to Wyoming? Why were you there? What did what did you do, and how was your trip and presentation received?
Oh, it's wonderful. The people of Wyoming, in particular, Senator Sherry Steinmetz and others that are in the government of the GOP, when Governor Gordon of Wyoming announced this global decarbonization for the West, and he's really pushing carbon capture for Wyoming, which is expensive, unneeded, and necessary. They came to us because they knew that we were the experts and had the scientific clout to take this on. They came and sought us out, and I said, "Heck yeah!" And so we traveled there. We did this report. They came and asked us. So we're doing a series of state and regional reports. We've done Pennsylvania, Virginia, the Midwest, Wyoming. I'm on to Arkansas next. And so what we're doing is people understand, and that's why we did it, to fight back against Governor Gordon. And when he came out and announced this decarbonization for Wyoming, the GOP actually voted no confidence against him. And there's been a real uprising by his Republicans in the state to fight back against this crazy notion of CO2 removal and sequestration. And so that's why we did it. We answered the call, and we're going to be doing a whole series of these to go across, because it's really impactful when you see your own state and see the actual data for your state and see what's going on. People looked at it and their eyes just got wide. They had no idea. For example, in Wyoming, one of the claims is that the end of snow is near. The ski resorts there will go out of business because they won't have snow. We took a buyer and supply and looked at 8 of the top ski resorts in the state of Wyoming and found out that 5 of the 8 had increasing amounts of snowfall on an annual basis. One was pretty flat and 2 had a slight decline. So contrary to what their claim of the end of snow, we actually went and looked at the data that was completely opposite of what they were claiming. And they were claiming an increase in drought, and we showed increase in precipitation, just opposite, an increase in precipitation.
And you know what, Greg? This is something that happens on a regular basis. I mean, literally every week when we write stories for Climate Realism, there's a claim made that something is disappearing, or something is that snow is coming to an end, or whatever. And then you go look at the actual data, and it completely debunks it. And these folks, when they write these articles, they don't bother to look at actual data. They just go with, well, and a respected climate scientist says, or some grad student who's going to be a climate scientist says. They go with that instead of looking at data.
Yeah, Anthony, that's why we have to be silenced, because we make a lot of sense and we have science, facts, and data on our side. If we could get our message out to the general public that's uncensored, it'd be all over for them, because we make sense and we have the science, facts, and data on our side. We can point at each one of these claims, but it's not allowed. And if we were allowed, like I say, it'd be all over for this alarmist nonsense, because they just can't support it.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, I'm going to tout the Robinson Center a bit here and some of our staff. We also look at, we both presented papers for different states in the past on their climate changes and showing they're beneficial, not disasters, but also, how different laws with our research and commentaries and research and I forget our new publication, shows how carbon capture, for instance, or ESG or net zero policies in different states, state by state, we say, this is how it's going to affect you. This is what the cost will be. This is how many people will be put out of work. So we do something similar to what you're doing, not always just on science, but looking at the policy. Mm-hmm. I take it after your presentation, the Senate or the Congress, the legislature there
They
in
were
Wyoming. They were very,
warmed up.
amazed and warmly received. And I take it that the governor was justly chastised and changed his mind completely after your presentation, correct?
Yeah.
Well, they were warmly received. The first part was right. No, I don't think Governor Gordon's going to change his mind on that. But it was encouraging. One of the fellows in the audience, there were a lot of young people there when we testified, and he said the one fellow turned around to his buddies and he says, "This is great," to his friends in the back as we're testifying. And Will Happer, Dr. Happer, joined us, and he's tireless. He put us to shame. He walks a lot faster than I do, but he talked about, he was the first time I've ever heard him go through his explanation of his invention of the sodium guide star laser, and he went back through his time with the Strategic Defense Initiative during the Reagan administration. We'll be capturing that as part of our. We'll be doing some shorts and some segments of our talk out there. It was fascinating to know that. You're not going to let me get out of here without touting my new book, A Very Convenient Warming. So I have to hold that up. It was just published about 3 weeks ago.
Well, good.
Well, you don't get off that easy. We got some questions.
No, come on. All right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, I want to thank you, Greg, for in Wyoming taking climate change to the train station.
Yeah, it was really exhilarating. It was fun, and it was really easy to do. It's like shooting fish in a barrel because they have all these claims, and all we have to do is, we just have to find the facts that dispute it. And it wasn't that hard to find. If anybody really cared about this, it'd be easy to dispute, and anybody should look into it. We'll find out what we did.
Right. So now I want to get to our section where we talk about questions and answers, some of the questions that have been posed by our viewers and commenters. Here's our first one. The biggest problem we face is that...
Anthony, this isn't the question. I just put up a comment. Sorry about that. Okay,
Yep.
I'm stealing it from Anthony. I'm going to be running question and answers today. I've been hovering over the comment section. You guys always have really good questions, so we appreciate that. First question we have is this one. Leaks attributed to FEMA, perhaps a PSYOP, claim that the magnetic poles are going to shift, causing the collapse of the magnetosphere and bring about an ice age. Is there any scientific validity to these claims?
Run for your lives.
I hear this a lot, so I
There we
do
go.
think we should be able to answer this one. I think, magnetic poles have shifted in Earth's history, but I think that some of the catastrophism and some of the theories connected to it, the way that it's presented in kind of pop culture right now, is a little bit much.
Agreed.
What do you guys say?
Yeah. It's got the same validity as HARP.
Exactly. Thank you, Anthony.
Next question we have is, any data of how the newer green energy companies performing who remember the Solyndra fiasco? So I guess we're asking about Solyndra and current green companies. Are they headed down kind of the same track, or have they gotten a little smarter?
Well, I can speak to this a little bit. It depends on what you mean by how they're doing. Most of the EV companies are struggling now. They're having to discount their wares. They're not making the profits they made for about a year. Remember, Tesla wasn't profitable for most of its existence. The offshore wind companies are backing out of deals because they're losing billions on their projects. The truth is, none of these companies would be making a profit, any profit at all, were it not for government subsidies and support. The industry would dry up and disappear tomorrow. And how do we know this? Every time the built-in subsidies to various government programs lapse. So at the end of the year, the budget's not done. We don't have a continuing resolution, and the program lapses. The production tax credit for wind or solar. The factory shut down the next day, not weeks later because they've got all this built up demand. No, they can't survive without government support. And that tells you it ain't a good industry to be in market wise. If you can't compete in the market, you're probably not doing anything that the public wants,
How
as
dare
opposed to
you.
some selected interests. Some people are profiting. Don't get me wrong. There are people profiting, but companies aren't doing well in general.
Thank you very
I'd
much
agree
for
with
this.
you there. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Okay, next one we have this one. How is it possible to measure 0.1 degree Celsius changes given the accuracy and resolution of the finest thermometers, regardless of uncertainty in spatial and temporal variability of temperature?
Well, I can take that one. There's a school of thought that says that it's the large number theory, that if you get enough data all put together, the precision increases, but it's here's the problem though, and most people don't know this. In the United States, with the Cooperative Observer Network, which goes all the way back to around 1890 with the formation of the Weather Bureau, the directions have always been round off the temperature to the nearest degree Fahrenheit. And so when they report the high and the low, so for example, let's say the high was 79.5 degrees Fahrenheit for a day. They round that up to 80. And so that extra precision in those measurements, that 0.1 degree Fahrenheit, which you could actually read on the thermometers, is thrown out. And then supposedly by using large amounts of measurements, we get that back. Well, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work. The bottom line is that we cannot accurately measure the temperature of the globe using the surface temperature network, not only because we're throwing out all of this extra data, but because it's highly biased by the fact that we've got all of these thermometers that have been encroached upon by human growth, human infrastructure, roads, buildings, parking lots, asphalt, concrete, all that stuff. I have shown again and again that when you look at the thermometers that have not been encroached upon, the ones that are out in the boonies, like at the Agricultural Research Station, the warming rate for them is about half of the rest of them. And so the bottom line is that we can't be measuring the temperature of the Earth accurately to 0.1 degrees. Yeah, this is my favorite here. This is the station that had been around for over 100 years. Until we pointed out that, hey, it's in the middle of a parking lot out in front of the Atmospheric Sciences Department in Tucson. Seriously. And then the reason it ended up there, it's a land grant university, and they kept making buildings here and buildings there. And where it was originally out on a grass field, it got moved every time they had to build something new. And they finally said, oh, well, we're out of places to put it. Let's just put it in the parking lot out front. Yeah, that's representative of climate change. Anyway, that station was closed quietly just a couple of months after we first reported it on What's Up With That. And they never really admitted to why they closed it, but we know why.
Well, Gregory, this one's to you. We ran an article about this, I believe, on Climate Realism a while back. And here's your question. Have you been reinstated to LinkedIn yet, or is LinkedIn still censoring your statements on climate change?
Yeah, about a month and a half or 2 months ago, I said, well, I'm going to try and get back on. And I did. I no sooner hit send as I got an immediate response back. It wasn't heck no. They said absolutely not. No, no, no. And if the people viewing here don't know, as a scientist, I posted data like you're showing here on the facts of just scientific data. I would source it, and they started taking each one of them down, calling it false and misleading, removing it, wagging their finger at me. And this happened day after day. In my very last post on LinkedIn, I said, I think I'm about to be banned and deplatformed by LinkedIn. They removed that post, called it false and misleading, and then banned and deplatformed me. Now that's funny. I got that and I was laughing. It's sad, but still, you got to kind of laugh at things like that. No, so I got a permanent ban on LinkedIn for posting factual data.
Well, maybe
and I'm proud of that.
until Elon Musk buys it and you can get back on. So what about other platforms? Because there are some other platforms that have given you problems, right?
Yeah, and we're still getting, it looks like we're being shadow banned on, like you guys, I'm sure, get with Facebook. X has been pretty good to us. We've seen significant increase there. We're a little bit younger than Heartland, and we're only we'll be in our 10th year next year. So I'm still building out the staff here where we need to, I'm whining and whimpering because we have so much to do and not enough staff to do it. But we're really working on our social media to get that out and improve that. So yeah, we're still being banned and censored to some extent. In fact, on Instagram, we've got to get this figured out. Before we could even make our first post on Instagram, they deplatformed us. Still have no idea. We just haven't taken the time to fight it. I don't know what happened there.
Well, that's more
Okay.
than in depth than we can get into in this show, I think.
Yeah. Do we have time for one or two more questions?
I think so. Just one.
Okay. This is the next one that I have starred. So have you guys read Dr. Javier Vino's book, Solving the Climate Puzzle? His winter gatekeeper hypothesis has amazing explanatory power, far more than the CO2 drives all climate change hypothesis. I am personally not familiar, but I'm wondering if one of our panel is.
I've not. I didn't even know it existed until I saw that comment.
Yep,
Yeah.
I haven't read it either.
Okay, well, maybe I'll
I
find a
started-
different question so we have something.
Yeah.
Well, we run along.
All righty. Well, unless you have,
all right.
you have one more compelling question, Linnea?
Well, this one actually I would like to get up there. What are we thinking about carbon capture? Because this is
Carbon
an
capture
interesting
plant.
one. Yeah, this is an interesting one to me because I understand why the oil companies like it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the strategy to be able to keep operating, and that's also why some Greens hate it. They hate carbon capture.
I like
let
carbon
me jump
capture
in on
plants. I like trees.
Yeah, right.
But for this, I will say if carbon capture makes economic sense, although you're capturing the miracle molecule that's beneficial to the earth, but if it makes economic sense and you don't need subsidies and you're using it for economic benefit, I'm kind of okay with that. But if you're capturing it because you want to get rid of CO2 and your object is sequester it, and you put it into pump it down into an oil field to help move oil, that CO2 is not going to stay in the ground. It moves along with the oil and it comes out as miscible in oil. And as you're pumping it out, then the CO2 comes back up to the surface. And
Is that the new future? Is that the new future threat? Carbonated oil?
It's already very carbonated.
No, it's
it sounds like recycling to me.
It's a very effective strategy for moving.
Yeah, it's pointless.
Drawn down
really
and depleted reservoirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That kind of wraps it up for our show today. We've covered a lot of ground and lots of questions. I want to remind everyone to visit our websites, climaterealism.com, climateataglance.com, and energyataglance.com, and also Greg's website, co2coalition.org. Those are great references for anyone to use to debunk any of the arguments that you see on social media or letters to the editor or whatever. There's lots of good facts and information there. I also want to say that this episode 99 of Climate Change Roundtable is the last one that we're going to have under that name. Starting with episode 100, we're going to a new logo and a new look. We are going to be the Climate Realism Show, and that comes next week. So tune in next week for our new format and our new name, and be sure to hit that like button and share these videos on social media. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Greg, for joining us. Sterling and Linnea, thanks as well. I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate at the Heartland Institute, wishing you all a great Friday and a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.